The desert wind carried whispers of doubt through the forward operating base, and Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez knew every single one was about her. She adjusted the straps of her gear bag as she walked across the compound, her boots creating small clouds of dust with each step. The morning sun was already brutal at 0700 hours, promising another scorching day in Afghanistan's Helmand province. "There she is," she heard Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb mutter to his buddy as she passed the mess tent. "The so-called sniper specialist they sent us from Quantico." Elena kept walking, her face showing no emotion. She had heard worse in the 6 months since completing sniper school. Being one of only 12 women to graduate from Marine Corps Scout Sniper Course in the past decade made her a curiosity, a novelty, and, to some, a liability. The fact that she had scored the highest marks in her class seemed to matter less than the fact that she stood 5 feet 4 inches and weighed barely 130 pounds. Captain James Mitchell was waiting for her outside the briefing tent, his weathered face serious in the morning light. At 42, Mitchell had been leading sniper teams for nearly 2 decades. He had worked with over 50 different spotters and shooters, and Elena could tell he was still making up his mind about her. "Rodriguez," he nodded as she approached. "Ready for today's exercise?" "Yes, sir," she replied, setting down her gear bag. Inside was her carefully maintained M40A6 sniper rifle, a weapon she knew better than her own reflection. She had spent countless hours perfecting every aspect of her shooting technique, learning to read wind patterns, calculating bullet drop, and controlling her breathing and heartbeat. "Good. We have some guests today." Mitchell gestured toward a group of snipers from other units who had gathered near the shooting range. "Word has gotten around about your qualification scores. Some of the boys wanted to see if they were accurate." Elena followed his gaze to the assembled group. She recognized several faces from reputation alone. Gunnery Sergeant Rick Thompson from 2nd Battalion, known for a confirmed kill at 2,847 meters in Iraq. Staff Sergeant Kevin Park from 1st Battalion, who had successfully engaged targets at extreme range during operations in Syria. These were men with years of combat experience and dozens of confirmed kills between them. The shooting range at Forward Operating Base Viper was unlike anything back in training. Instead of neat, measured distances with clearly marked targets, it was a sprawling expanse of desert that stretched toward distant hills and mountains. The terrain was unforgiving, with unpredictable wind patterns caused by the varying elevations and rocky outcroppings. "What's the plan for today, sir?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew. This was not going to be a routine training exercise. This was a test, and everyone present knew it. "Long-range precision shooting," Mitchell replied. "We've set up targets at various distances, starting at 800 meters and working our way out to—" He paused, studying her face for any sign of nervousness. "For 1,200 meters. Elena felt a slight tightening in her stomach, but her expression remained calm. For 1,200 meters was further than she had ever attempted a shot. In training, the longest confirmed hit she had made was 3,100 meters, and that had been under ideal conditions with no wind and perfect visibility. "Understood, sir," she said simply. As they walked toward the firing position, Elena became aware of the growing audience. Word had spread quickly through the base, and soldiers were finding reasons to be in the area. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly as she passed. Never seen a woman attempt anything over 3,000. Heard she's some kind of prodigy from the civilian shooting circuit. Bet she folds under pressure when it really counts. The comments stung, but Elena had learned long ago that the only response that mattered was performance. Her father, a retired Army Ranger, had taught her that respect was earned through action, not words. Her mother, a former Olympic biathlete, had shown her that precision under pressure was a skill that could be developed and perfected. The shooting position was a sandbagged area with a clear view of the targets that had been positioned throughout the valley. Elena could see the closer targets clearly through her scope, but the distant ones appeared as mere dots against the mountainous backdrop. The 4,200-meter target was barely visible even with magnification. Wind speed and direction, she asked her assigned spotter, Corporal Jake Sullivan. Sullivan was a 24-year-old from Montana who had initially been skeptical about working with a female sniper, but had warmed up to her during their brief training sessions together. Variable winds, gusting between 15 and 25 knots from the southwest, Sullivan reported, studying his instruments. Temperature is rising fast. It's going to affect bullet trajectory significantly at long range. Elena nodded, making mental calculations. Long-range shooting was as much about mathematics and physics as it was about marksmanship. Bullet drop, wind drift, air density, temperature, humidity, and even the rotation of the Earth all played roles in determining where a bullet would strike at extreme distances. She began setting up her rifle, a process she had repeated thousands of times, but never took for granted. Every component was checked and rechecked. The scope mounting was verified to be perfectly aligned. The bipod legs were adjusted for the uneven terrain. She loaded a single round of match-grade ammunition, specially selected for its consistency and accuracy. First target, 800 meters, Captain Mitchell announced. This was considered a relatively easy shot for a qualified sniper under good conditions. Elena settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of a rifle against her shoulder. She controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow and steady. Through the scope, the target appeared clear and sharp. She made minor adjustments for wind and elevation, then squeezed the trigger with steady, even pressure. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. 2 seconds later, Sullivan confirmed the hit through his spotting scope. Center mass, he announced. A few soldiers in the watching crowd nodded approvingly, but Elena knew this was just the beginning. The real challenges were yet to come. Next target, 1,200 meters, Mitchell called out. This shot required more careful calculation. Elena studied the wind flags positioned at various points downrange, noting how the wind direction and speed changed at different distances. She made adjustments to her scope and took the shot. Hit slightly right of center, Sullivan reported. The pattern continued as they worked their way through progressively more difficult targets. 1,800 meters, 2,400 meters, 3,000 meters. With each shot, Elena felt the weight of expectation growing heavier. The crowd of observers had grown larger, and she could sense their mixture of curiosity and skepticism. At 3,600 meters, she missed her first shot, the bullet striking low and left of the target. She heard a few murmurs from the crowd, some satisfied that she was finally showing limitations. But Elena remained focused, analyzing what had gone wrong. She adjusted for the changing wind conditions and took a second shot. Hit, Sullivan confirmed, and the murmurs died away. Now came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The 4,200-meter target sat on a distant hillside, barely visible even through her powerful scope. At this range, the bullet would be in flight for over 6 seconds, time enough for wind conditions to change multiple times along its path. Elena took her time studying the terrain, the wind patterns, and the environmental conditions. She made calculations in her head, cross-referencing them with data tables she had memorized. The mathematics were complex, but her training had prepared her for this. Conditions, she asked Sullivan. Wind variable, average 20 knots from southwest, gusting to 30. Temperature, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, less than 10%. Barometric pressure steady. Elena made her scope adjustments, compensating for the extreme range. She had to estimate bullet drop of over 40 feet at this distance, plus significant wind drift. One small error in calculation would result in a complete miss. She settled into her shooting position and began to control her breathing. In the silence that followed, she became aware of how many people were watching. The entire crowd had gone quiet, waiting to see if she could make a shot that would be impressive even for the most experienced snipers present. Through her scope, the target looked impossibly small and distant. Elena made her final calculations, took a deep breath, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired, and the bullet began its long journey across the valley. For 6 long seconds, everyone waited and watched. Elena remained in position, following the bullet's path through her scope. "Miss," Sullivan finally announced. "High and right approximately 3 meters." Elena heard the collective exhale from the watching crowd. Some sounded disappointed, others relieved. She had come close, but at extreme range, close was not good enough. "That was a hell of a shot, Rodriguez," Captain Mitchell said quietly. "Most snipers never even attempt anything over 3,500 meters. But Elena was not satisfied. She had missed, and in a combat situation, a miss could mean the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death for her fellow soldiers. She began analyzing what had gone wrong, studying the wind patterns, and reviewing her calculations. "Request permission to attempt the shot again, sir," she said. Mitchell looked surprised. "Rodriguez, you've already proven yourself today. There's no shame in." "Permission to try again, sir," she repeated, her voice steady but determined. The captain studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "One more shot." Elena began her preparation process again, but this time she took even longer to study the conditions. She noticed that the wind patterns had shifted slightly as the morning sun heated the ground, creating thermal updrafts that would affect bullet trajectory. She made new calculations, adjusting not just for distance and wind, but for the changing environmental conditions. The crowd watched in silence as she settled into position once more. This time, there was a different quality to the attention she was receiving. Word had spread that she was attempting the 4,200-meter shot again, and more soldiers had gathered to watch. Elena controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired, and once again the bullet began its journey across the valley. 6 seconds felt like an eternity as everyone waited to see the result. "Stand by," Sullivan said, studying the target through his spotting scope. The seconds stretched out. Then his voice came through clearly. "Hit. Clean hit. Center mass." The silence that followed was profound. A few soldiers began to applaud, then more joined in. Elena remained in position, verifying the hit through her own scope. At 4,200 meters, she had made one of the longest confirmed shots in recent military history. As she finally rose from the shooting position, Elena became aware that the atmosphere around her had changed. The skeptical looks had been replaced by expressions of respect and even awe. These were experienced combat veterans who understood exactly how difficult the shot she had just made truly was. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson approached her first. "Outstanding shooting, Rodriguez. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like that shot." More congratulations followed from the other snipers. Elena accepted them graciously, but she was already thinking ahead. This had been a controlled exercise under relatively ideal conditions. Real combat would present challenges she could barely imagine. Captain Mitchell pulled her aside as the crowd began to disperse. "Rodriguez, I'm going to be honest with you. I had my doubts when they assigned you to my team. I've worked with a lot of snipers over the years, and I wasn't sure if—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Sir, you weren't sure if a woman could handle the job," Elena finished for him. Mitchell nodded. "That's right, and I was wrong. Dead wrong. What you did today, that was world-class shooting. I've never seen anyone adapt to conditions and make corrections like you did on that second shot." Elena felt a surge of pride, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my job." "No, you're doing much more than that," Mitchell replied. "And I have a feeling this is just the beginning." As Elena cleaned and secured her rifle, she reflected on the day's events. She had proven something important, not just to the other soldiers, but to herself. She belonged here, and she had earned her place through skill and determination rather than any special consideration. But even as she savored this moment of recognition, Elena knew that the real test was still to come. Training exercises were one thing. Combat was something entirely different, and she would not truly prove herself until she had the chance to use her skills in support of actual military operations. The war in Afghanistan was far from over, and Forward Operating Base Viper was positioned in one of the most active regions. It would not be long before Elena Rodriguez would have the opportunity to discover if her exceptional marksmanship skills could translate into combat effectiveness when lives were on the line. As the desert sun climbed higher and the temperature continued to rise, Elena secured her gear and began the walk back to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she intended to be ready for them. The whispers would continue, but now they would be whispers of a very different kind. The so-called rookie had just made a shot that would be talked about for years to come, and everyone at Forward Operating Base Viper now knew that Elena Rodriguez was not someone to be underestimated. Hashtag so-called rookie woman connects at nearly 5 kilometers. Document 2-3 weeks had passed since Elena's remarkable shooting demonstration, and the dynamics at Forward Operating Base Viper had shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. The dining hall conversations that once stopped when she approached now included her naturally. Soldiers who had previously avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully when they passed. Most importantly, the sniper teams that had once questioned her presence now sought her input on complex shooting problems. Elena was cleaning her rifle in the armory when Corporal Sullivan burst through the door, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious excitement. "Rodriguez, we've got a mission briefing in 10 minutes. Captain Mitchell wants the whole team assembled immediately." Elena looked up from the rifle components spread across the cleaning mat. "What kind of mission?" "Real world," Sullivan replied, his voice dropping to a whisper despite the fact that they were alone. "Word is there's been significant insurgent activity in the Sanjin Valley. Intelligence reports suggest they've set up a new supply route through the mountain passes." Elena felt her pulse quicken slightly, but her hands remained steady as she quickly reassembled her rifle. This was what she had been training for, what every hour at the range and every calculated shot had been preparing her for. The transition from training exercises to actual combat operations was a moment every soldier both anticipated and dreaded. The briefing room was packed when Elena and Sullivan arrived. Captain Mitchell stood at the front next to a large tactical map of the region, while Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes, the base commander, prepared to address the assembled personnel. Elena recognized most of the faces in the room as members of various special operations teams. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been making life and death decisions for over 2 decades. "Intelligence has confirmed that insurgent forces have established a major supply route through the Sanjin Valley. Our sources indicate they're moving weapons, ammunition, and possibly high-value targets through this corridor on a regular basis." She pointed to a winding path marked in red on the map. "The route runs through some of the most challenging terrain in our area of operations. High elevation, limited access points, and excellent natural cover for anyone trying to avoid detection." Elena studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes and the few vantage points that would provide clear lines of sight across the valley. It was exactly the kind of environment where skilled snipers could make a decisive difference. "Our mission," Hayes continued, "is to establish observation posts at key locations and interdict this supply route. We need accurate intelligence on their movements, and we need to be prepared to engage high-value targets when the opportunity presents itself." Captain Mitchell stepped forward and took over the briefing. "We'll be inserting 3 sniper teams at different positions along the valley. Each team will establish overwatch positions and maintain surveillance for an extended period. This is not a quick in-and-out operation. We could be out there for several days." Elena felt Sullivan shift slightly beside her. Extended operations in hostile territory were always dangerous, but they were especially challenging for sniper teams who had to remain concealed while maintaining constant vigilance. "Team assignments," Mitchell announced, consulting his notes. "Team 1 will consist of Gunnery Sergeant Thompson and Staff Sergeant Martinez. Team 2 will be Staff Sergeant Park and Corporal Williams. Team 3. He paused and looked directly at Elena. "Sergeant Rodriguez and Corporal Sullivan." Elena heard a few murmurs from around the room. While her shooting skills were no longer questioned, this would be her first real combat mission as a primary sniper. The responsibility was enormous. Each team will be inserted by helicopter at predetermined locations under cover of darkness, Mitchell continued. From there, you'll move to your assigned observation posts and establish concealed positions. Communication will be maintained through encrypted radio channels, but remember that operational security is paramount. Unnecessary chatter could compromise not just your position, but the entire operation. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes resumed control of the briefing. Weather reports indicate clear skies for the next 72 hours, which is both good and bad news. Good visibility for observation and engagement, but also increased risk of detection if you're not properly concealed. She moved to another map, showing detailed topographical information. The terrain you'll be operating in ranges from 3,000 to 5,500 feet elevation. Temperature variations will be extreme, from below freezing at night to over 100 degrees during the day. Make sure your equipment is prepared for these conditions. Elena made mental notes about how the temperature changes would affect her rifle's zero and ammunition performance. Extreme temperature variations could cause significant changes in bullet trajectory, especially at long range. Intelligence reports suggest the insurgents are moving primarily at night, but we've also detected daytime activity. Your teams need to be prepared for engagement opportunities at any time, Hayes added. The briefing continued for another hour, covering emergency extraction procedures, medical support, and rules of engagement. Elena absorbed every detail, knowing that in combat, seemingly minor pieces of information could become critically important. When the briefing concluded, Captain Mitchell approached Elena and Sullivan. Rodriguez, a word. Elena followed Mitchell to a quiet corner of the room where they could speak privately. This is your first real mission, Mitchell said, his expression serious. I need to know that you're ready for this. Shooting at targets on a range is one thing. Shooting at human beings is something entirely different. Elena met his gaze steadily. Sir, I understand the difference. I've prepared myself mentally for this reality. When the time comes, I'll do my job. Mitchell studied her face for a long moment. I believe you will. But I also want you to know that you don't have anything to prove out there. You've already demonstrated your capabilities. Don't take unnecessary risks trying to impress anyone. Understood, sir. Good. Your team will be positioned on Hill 847, overlooking the primary mountain pass. Based on intelligence reports, you'll have the best opportunity for long-range engagement from that position. The distance to the likely target areas ranges from 1,200 to 4,800 meters. Elena felt a familiar flutter of anticipation. Those were the distances where her skills could make a real difference. The next several hours were spent in final preparations. Elena meticulously checked every piece of equipment, from her primary rifle to backup ammunition to cold weather gear. She reviewed topographical maps of Hill 847, studying approach routes and potential shooting positions. Sullivan proved to be an excellent partner during the preparation phase. His experience as a spotter was evident in how thoroughly he researched environmental conditions and prepared his observation equipment. Elena was grateful to be working with someone who understood how critical the spotter's role was to sniper team success. What do you think about the mission? Sullivan asked as they packed their gear for the helicopter insertion. I think it's exactly what we've been training for, Elena replied. Long-range precision shooting in challenging terrain against targets that need to be eliminated. It doesn't get much more straightforward than that. Sullivan grinned. Straightforward? We're going to be sitting on a mountain for days, possibly engaging targets at distances where most people can't even see what they're shooting at, in hostile territory where discovery could mean death. That's your definition of straightforward. Elena smiled slightly as she secured her rifle in its case. When you put it like that, it does sound a bit complicated. As night fell, the three sniper teams made final preparations for insertion. The helicopters that would transport them were specially modified for quiet operation, designed to minimize the noise signature that could alert enemy forces to their presence. Elena felt the familiar pre-mission tension that she remembered from training exercises, but magnified by the knowledge that this time, lives were truly at stake. Not just her own life and Sullivan's, but potentially the lives of other coalition forces who were depending on the sniper teams to provide accurate intelligence and eliminate threats. The helicopter ride to the insertion point took 45 minutes, flying low and fast through mountain valleys to avoid detection. Elena spent the time reviewing her equipment one final time and running through mental rehearsals of various engagement scenarios. The insertion itself went smoothly. The helicopter touched down on a rocky plateau just long enough for Elena and Sullivan to exit with their equipment, then lifted off and disappeared into the darkness. Suddenly, they were alone in hostile territory with a mission to complete. The hike to Hill 847 took 3 hours, moving carefully through terrain that was treacherous even in daylight. Elena was grateful for the months of physical conditioning that allowed her to carry her heavy equipment without becoming exhausted. By the time they reached their designated position, both she and Sullivan were ready to establish their hide site and begin the mission. The location Captain Mitchell had selected was nearly perfect. A natural depression in the rocky hillside provided excellent concealment while offering clear lines of sight across the entire valley. Elena could see the mountain pass where intelligence reports indicated insurgent movement was most likely to occur. Distance to the center of the pass? Elena asked as Sullivan set up his spotting scope. Approximately 3,400 meters, Sullivan replied after taking measurements with his laser rangefinder. Wind is currently calm, but we're likely to see significant changes as the sun comes up and thermal patterns shift. Elena established her shooting position, carefully arranging rocks and using her ghillie suit to break up her outline against the landscape. From more than a few meters away, she would be virtually invisible to anyone scanning the hillside. The first 24 hours of the mission passed uneventfully. Elena and Sullivan maintained constant observation of the valley, documenting vehicle movements and photographing individuals who appeared to be conducting surveillance of their own. The intelligence they gathered would be valuable even if no shooting opportunities presented themselves. On the second day, their patience was rewarded. Sullivan spotted movement in the mountain pass during the early morning hours. "I've got activity," he whispered into his radio headset. "Multiple individuals moving through the pass in tactical formation. Appears to be an armed patrol." Elena shifted slightly to position her rifle toward the area Sullivan was observing. Through her scope, she could see several figures moving carefully through the rocky terrain. They were armed and clearly conducting themselves like trained fighters rather than civilians. "Command, this is Overwatch 3, Sullivan transmitted. "We have visual on armed individuals in the target area. Request permission to engage if they present valid targets." The response came back quickly. "Overwatch 3, you are authorized to engage valid military targets per rules of engagement. Confirm target identification before firing." Elena felt her heart rate increase slightly, but her hands remained perfectly steady. This was the moment she had prepared for. Through her scope, she studied the figures in the pass, identifying weapons and equipment that confirmed they were legitimate military targets. "Range 3,420 meters, Sullivan reported quietly. "Wind 5 to 8 knots from the northeast. Temperature 87 degrees and rising." Elena made mental calculations for bullet drop and wind drift at that range. The shot would be challenging, but well within her demonstrated capabilities. She adjusted her scope accordingly and settled into her shooting position. "I have a clear shot on the lead target," she whispered. "Confirmed. Clear to engage when ready." Elena controlled her breathing and focused on the fundamentals that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. The target appeared clearly in her scope crosshairs. She made a final adjustment for wind and squeezed the trigger with smooth, even pressure. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Elena remained in position, following the bullet's path through her scope while Sullivan observed the target area through his spotting equipment. Sullivan confirmed after what seemed like an eternity, but was actually only about 5 seconds. Target is down. Elena felt a complex mix of emotions as she saw the figure in the pass fall. Relief that her shot had been accurate, satisfaction that her training had proven effective under actual combat conditions, and a sobering awareness that she had just taken a human life in service of her country's military objectives. The other figures in the pass immediately scattered, seeking cover among the rocks. Elena's searched for additional targets, but the remaining insurgents had found concealment and were no longer visible. "Outstanding shot, Rodriguez," Sullivan said quietly. "Clean hit at over 3,400 meters on the first shot. That's going to send a message." Elena began scanning other areas of the valley, knowing that the insurgents would likely attempt to locate the source of the shot. Her position was well concealed, but experienced fighters would know the general area where a sniper would need to be positioned to make such a shot. For the next several hours, Elena and Sullivan observed increased activity throughout the valley as insurgent forces searched for the sniper team. But their hide site remained undetected, and they continued to provide valuable intelligence to the command center. As the sun began to set on their second day in position, Elena reflected on the events of the mission so far. She had successfully engaged an enemy target at extreme range under actual combat conditions, proving that her training and natural abilities could translate into effective combat performance. But she also understood that the mission was far from over. The insurgent forces now knew that coalition snipers were operating in the area, and they would likely change their tactics and routes accordingly. The next phase of the operation would require even greater skill and vigilance as both sides adapted to the evolving situation on the ground. Hashtag so-called Rookie Woman connects at nearly 5 kilometers. Document 3. The third day of the mission began before dawn with an encrypted radio transmission that changed everything. Elena was monitoring the communication frequency when Captain Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece with urgent news. "All Overwatch teams, this is Base Command. Intelligence has identified a high-value target moving through your operational area. Designation Scorpion. This is our primary objective." Elena felt Sullivan tense beside her as they both processed the significance of this development. High-value targets were individuals whose capture or elimination could significantly disrupt enemy operations. The fact that one was moving through their area of responsibility meant this mission had just become much more critical. Scorpion is believed to be a regional insurgent commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces, Mitchell continued. Intelligence reports indicate he will be traveling through the Sanjin Valley sometime in the next 24 hours with a small security detail. Elena checked her rifle and equipment automatically, ensuring everything was ready for what might be the most important shot of her military career. Through her scope, she scanned the valley below, noting how the morning light was beginning to illuminate the various paths and hiding spots that Scorpion might use. "All teams maintain heightened alert status," Mitchell concluded. "This target is extremely dangerous and has been evading capture for over 18 months. Do not let him escape." Sullivan adjusted his spotting scope and began a systematic scan of the entire valley. "If this guy's as smart as they say, he won't use the obvious routes. He'll probably move through areas that give him natural concealment from observation posts." Elena nodded, studying the topographical map they had memorized during mission planning. There were several routes through the valley that would be difficult to observe from their current position. "What about the northern ridge route? It's more exposed, but if he moves fast enough during low light conditions." "That's what I'm thinking," Sullivan agreed. "It would put him at about 4,600 meters from our position, but the line of sight is clear." They spent the next several hours taking turns observing different areas of the valley while the other rested. Long-range shooting required absolute alertness and steady nerves, which were difficult to maintain during extended periods of high tension. Around midday, their patience was tested when Sullivan spotted movement in one of the secondary passes. "I've got 3 individuals moving through the eastern approach," he whispered. armed, moving tactically, but I can't identify specific individuals from this distance. Elena swung her rifle toward the area Sullivan was observing. Through her scope, she could see 3 figures moving carefully through the rocky terrain. They were too far away to identify specific facial features, even with maximum magnification. "Range?" she asked quietly. 3,800 meters, Sullivan replied. "Wind is variable, but averaging about 12 knots from the southwest." Elena studied the figures through her scope, looking for anything that might identify one of them as their target. But at this distance, and with the individuals wearing traditional Afghan clothing and head coverings, positive identification was impossible. "We can't confirm target identity," she concluded reluctantly. "Rules of engagement require positive identification before engaging high-value targets." Sullivan agreed, though Elena could sense his frustration. They watched as the 3 figures completed their transit through the pass and disappeared into terrain where they could no longer be observed. If one of them had been Scorpion, they had just missed their opportunity. As afternoon turned toward evening, Elena and Sullivan continued their vigilant watch over the valley. The temperature had reached over 110 degrees during the peak heat of the day, making their concealed position uncomfortable despite their desert camouflage equipment. "Movement on the northern ridge," Sullivan suddenly announced, his voice tight with concentration. Multiple individuals moving in tactical formation. Elena immediately shifted her attention to the northern ridge route they had discussed earlier. Through her scope, she could see a group of armed individuals moving along the ridge line. Unlike the earlier sighting, these figures were moving with the kind of security formation typically used to protect high-value individuals. "I count 6 individuals total," Sullivan reported. "For appear to be security, 2 are in the center of the formation." Elena studied the group carefully through her rifle scope. The security personnel were armed with modern assault rifles and moved with the discipline of trained fighters. The 2 individuals in the center of the formation were dressed differently, suggesting they might be commanders rather than ordinary fighters. "Range to the center of the group?" Elena asked. 4,700 meters, Sullivan replied after consulting his instruments. "Wind is 15 to 20 knots from the southwest, gusting up to 25. Elena felt her pulse quicken. This was at the very limit of effective sniper range, even under ideal conditions. The distance was greater than her record-setting shot at the forward operating base, and the environmental conditions were far more challenging. "I need positive identification before we can engage," she said, studying the figures through her scope. At nearly 5 kilometers distance, identifying specific individuals was extremely difficult. Sullivan switched to his high-power spotting scope and began a detailed examination of the group. After several minutes of careful observation, he made a positive identification that sent adrenaline surging through Elena's system. "I've got positive identification on Scorpion," he announced. Tall individual, center rear of the formation, distinctive white beard visible under head covering. Matches description from intelligence briefing. Elena shifted her scope to focus on the individual Sullivan had identified. Through maximum magnification, she could just make out the facial features that matched the description they had been given. This was their target. "Command, this is Overwatch 3, Sullivan transmitted. "We have positive identification on Scorpion. Request permission to engage." The response came back immediately. "Overwatch 3, you are clear to engage. Take the shot." Elena felt the familiar calm that descended over her when she was preparing for a difficult shot. All the noise and confusion of the surrounding environment faded away, leaving only her rifle, and the target nearly 5 kilometers away. "Range 4,700 meters, Sullivan repeated. "Wind 20 knots from southwest, gusting to 25. Temperature 103 degrees. Target is moving slowly but steadily along the ridge line." Elena began her mental calculations for what would be one of the longest sniper shots ever attempted in combat. At this distance, the bullet would be in flight for over 7 seconds, enough time for wind conditions to change multiple times along its path. The bullet drop would be enormous, requiring her to aim what seemed like an impossible distance above the target. She made her scope adjustments, compensating for the extreme range and environmental conditions. The mathematics were complex, but her training had prepared her for exactly this situation. She had practiced these calculations thousands of times until they became automatic. Target is approaching a clearing in approximately 30 seconds, Sullivan reported. After that, he'll have natural cover for several hundred meters. Elena understood that this might be their only clear shot opportunity. If Scorpion made it past the clearing, he would be hidden by rocks and vegetation that would make engagement impossible from their position. She settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of the rifle stock against her shoulder. Her breathing became deep and controlled, her heart rate slowing despite the enormous pressure of the moment. Through her scope, she could see Scorpion approaching the clearing where she would have a brief window for the shot. 20 seconds to optimal firing position, Sullivan announced quietly. Elena made her final scope adjustments and began her breathing control sequence. At this range, even the slightest movement or tremor could cause a complete miss. Everything had to be perfect. Target entering the clearing now, Sullivan reported. Through her scope, Elena could see Scorpion clearly silhouetted against the sky as he moved across the open area. This was the moment she had trained for, the shot that could save countless coalition lives by eliminating a dangerous enemy commander. She controlled her breathing, allowing her natural respiratory pause to provide the steady platform she needed. Her finger settled on the trigger with the light, consistent pressure she had practiced thousands of times. Taking the shot, she whispered and squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Elena remained in position, following the bullet's path through her scope, while Sullivan observed the target area through his spotting equipment. For 7 long seconds, the bullet traveled across the valley toward its target. Elena could see Scorpion continuing to move across the clearing, unaware of the danger, racing toward him at over 2,500 feet per second. Sullivan suddenly exclaimed, his voice filled with amazement. Clean hit, center mass. Target is down. Elena watched through her scope as the figure she had aimed at collapsed to the ground. The security personnel immediately scattered, seeking cover and scanning the surrounding area for the source of the shot. But at nearly 5 kilometers distance, locating their position would be virtually impossible. Confirmed kill on Scorpion, Sullivan transmitted to the command center. Target eliminated by precision rifle fire. Elena remained in position, searching for additional targets among the scattered security personnel. But the remaining insurgents had found effective cover among the rocks and were no longer visible. Outstanding shot, Rodriguez, Sullivan said quietly, his voice filled with professional respect. That was nearly 5 kilometers in challenging wind conditions. I've never seen anything like that. Elena felt a profound sense of accomplishment, but also a sobering awareness of what she had just done. She had eliminated a high-value enemy commander with a shot that would likely be talked about in military circles for years to come. More importantly, she had proven that her abilities could make a real difference in actual combat operations. Command, this is Overwatch 3, Sullivan transmitted. Mission accomplished. Scorpion has been eliminated. Recommend immediate extraction as our position may be compromised. The response came back quickly. Overwatch 3, outstanding work. Extraction helicopters are en route to your position. Estimated time of arrival, 45 minutes. As Elena began securing her equipment for extraction, she reflected on the events of the mission. She had successfully engaged targets at ranges that most snipers never attempted, under conditions that tested every aspect of her training and natural ability. But more than that, she had proven something important to herself and to the military community. She belonged here, not because of any special consideration or lowered standards, but because of her exceptional skill and dedication to her profession. The radio crackled with congratulations from the other sniper teams and the command center. Elena accepted them graciously, but she was already thinking ahead to the debriefing and analysis that would follow. Every successful mission provided lessons that could improve future operations. As the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder in the distance, Elena and Sullivan prepared to leave Hill 847. The mission had been a complete success, but Elena knew that this was just the beginning of what she hoped would be a long and distinguished career as a military sniper. The so-called rookie had just made military history with a shot that would be studied and discussed for decades to come. But more importantly, she had saved lives and struck a significant blow against enemy forces that threatened coalition personnel throughout the region. Hashtag so-called rookie woman connects at nearly 5 kilometers. Document 4: the helicopter extraction from Hill 847 was swift and professional, but Elena could sense the excitement among the crew members as word of her extraordinary shot spread throughout the military communication networks. By the time they landed at Forward Operating Base Viper, news of the successful elimination of Scorpion had reached the highest levels of command. Elena found herself escorted directly to a debriefing session that included not only Captain Mitchell and Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, but also several senior intelligence officers who had flown in specifically to discuss the mission's implications. The small conference room felt crowded with so many high-ranking personnel present. Sergeant Rodriguez, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes began, her voice carrying a tone of professional respect that Elena had not heard before. What you accomplished out there was extraordinary by any measure. A confirmed kill at 4,700 meters under field conditions is a remarkable achievement. Elena sat at attention, still processing the events of the past several days. Thank you, ma'am. I was doing my job as trained. This was considerably more than routine performance, interjected Colonel Marcus Webb, a senior intelligence officer Elena had never met before. Scorpion was responsible for coordinating insurgent activities across 3 provinces. His elimination will significantly disrupt enemy operations in this region. Captain Mitchell leaned forward at the conference table. Rodriguez, I need you to walk us through your shot sequence in detail. The conditions you were working under, your calculations, how you compensated for the extreme range, and environmental factors. Elena spent the next hour providing a detailed technical analysis of her shot. She explained her calculations for bullet drop, wind drift, and atmospheric conditions. She described how she had compensated for the target's movement and the multiple variables that affected bullet trajectory at extreme range. The key factor was recognizing that wind conditions were different at various points along the bullet's path, she explained. At nearly 5 kilometers, the bullet travels through multiple wind zones with different speeds and directions. I had to estimate an average effect rather than trying to compensate for each individual zone. The assembled officers took extensive notes, and Elena realized that her shooting techniques were being documented for training purposes. Future snipers would study her methods and attempt to replicate her success under similar conditions. What was your confidence level when you took the shot? Colonel Webb asked. Elena considered the question carefully. I was confident in my calculations and my technique, sir. But at that range, with those conditions, no shot is certain. There are too many variables that can affect bullet trajectory. I knew I had prepared as well as possible, but success ultimately depended on executing everything perfectly. And you did execute perfectly, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes observed. The post-mission analysis confirms that your shot placement was within inches of optimal at nearly 5 kilometers distance. The debriefing continued for several more hours as intelligence officers gathered every detail about insurgent movements, security procedures, and tactical observations from the mission. Elena provided detailed descriptions of everything she had observed through her scope, information that would be valuable for planning future operations. When the formal debriefing concluded, Elena found herself walking across the base compound with Captain Mitchell. The afternoon heat was still intense, but the knowledge that she had successfully completed her first combat mission made even the desert climate seem manageable. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology, Mitchell said as they walked. When you were first assigned to my team, I had serious doubts about your readiness for combat operations. I was wrong, and I want you to know that. Elena appreciated the acknowledgement, but she was more interested in looking forward than dwelling on past skepticism. Sir, what matters is that the mission was successful. That's what we're here for. That's a professional attitude, and it's one of the reasons you've earned everyone's respect, Mitchell replied. But I also want you to understand that what you've accomplished is going to have implications beyond just this mission. Elena looked at him questioningly. Word of your shot is already spreading throughout the military community, Mitchell explained. A 4,700-meter confirmed kill is going to be studied and analyzed by sniper instructors and advanced marksmanship specialists around the world. You've just set a new standard for what's possible in precision shooting. Elena felt a mixture of pride and concern. While she was pleased that her skills were being recognized, she was also aware that increased attention could bring unwanted pressures and expectations. Sir, I don't want special treatment or recognition. I just want to continue doing my job effectively. I understand that, Mitchell said. But you need to be prepared for the fact that your career is going to be different now. Success at your level brings opportunities, but it also brings challenges. That evening, Elena was cleaning her rifle in the armory when Gunnery Sergeant Thompson approached. The veteran sniper had been at the base for over 2 years and had more combat experience than almost anyone else in the unit. Rodriguez, mind if I join you? Thompson asked, indicating the cleaning station next to hers. Of course, Gunny. Please. Thompson began field stripping his rifle with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed the task thousands of times. For several minutes, they worked in comfortable silence, both focused on the detailed maintenance their weapons required. I've been shooting professionally for over 15 years, Thompson finally said. I've made shots that most people would consider impossible. But what you did out there, that was something special. Elena looked up from the rifle component she was cleaning. Thank you, Gunny. That means a lot coming from you. I'm not saying this to blow smoke, Thompson continued. I'm saying it because you need to understand the responsibility that comes with capabilities like yours. When word gets around about what you can do, you're going to be called upon for missions that other snipers couldn't handle. Elena nodded, understanding the implications. I'm ready for that responsibility. I believe you are, Thompson said. But I also want to make sure you stay grounded. Success can be dangerous if it leads to overconfidence. The moment you start thinking you can't miss is the moment you become a liability to your team. Elena appreciated the veteran's advice. She had seen talented individuals in various fields become victims of their own success, allowing recognition and praise to compromise their judgment and performance. Gunny, can I ask you about something? Elena said, how do you handle the psychological aspect of taking a life, especially at long range where you can observe the target for extended periods? Thompson paused in his cleaning routine, considering the question carefully. It's something every sniper has to deal with, and everyone handles it differently. For me, I focus on the mission objective and the lives I'm protecting by eliminating threats. But I also acknowledge that what we do has moral weight, and I don't take that lightly. Elena nodded. During her mission, she had been so focused on the technical aspects of making an extremely difficult shot that the psychological implications had been secondary. But now, in the quiet of the armory, she was processing the full meaning of what had occurred. The key is maintaining perspective, Thompson continued. We're not killers for the sake of killing. We're soldiers performing a necessary function in a larger military operation designed to protect innocent lives and achieve legitimate objectives. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Corporal Sullivan, who was carrying his own rifle for maintenance. Rodriguez, you might want to hear this, Sullivan said, his expression showing a mixture of excitement and concern. Word is coming down that your shot has been confirmed as the longest successful sniper engagement in recent military history. Elena felt her stomach tighten slightly. Recognition for exceptional performance was gratifying, but she was beginning to understand that it would also bring pressures she had not anticipated. What kind of recognition are we talking about? She asked. Military decorations. Almost certainly, Sullivan replied. Probably media attention, maybe even requests for training demonstrations or speaking engagements. Elena looked at Thompson, who nodded knowingly. This is what I was talking about, the veteran said. Success at your level doesn't happen in a vacuum. The military wants to showcase exceptional performance, and they want to use it for training and morale purposes. Over the next several days, Elena's prediction proved accurate. She received notification that she was being recommended for the Bronze Star Medal for her actions during the mission. Military journalists requested interviews about her shooting techniques and training background. Advanced marksmanship instructors wanted to study her methods for potential inclusion in sniper school curricula. While Elena was pleased that her skills were being recognized, she found the attention somewhat overwhelming. She had joined the military to serve her country, not to become a public figure or celebrity. The idea that her personal story might be used for recruitment or public relations purposes made her uncomfortable. The situation became more complex when Elena received orders to report to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico for a special assignment. She would be temporarily detached from her unit to assist with advanced curriculum development and to demonstrate her shooting techniques for senior instructors. This is a significant opportunity, Captain Mitchell explained when he delivered the orders. The Marine Corps wants to understand your methods so they can potentially incorporate them into training programs for future snipers. Elena understood the value of sharing knowledge and improving training methods, but she was reluctant to leave her unit during an active deployment. Her team had developed effective working relationships and proven combat effectiveness. Breaking up that team seemed counterproductive. Sir, what about ongoing operations? Is the unit going to be short-handed for sniper support? We'll manage, Mitchell assured her. This assignment is only temporary, and the knowledge you develop there will benefit the entire sniper community when you return. Elena spent her final days at Forward Operating Base Viper completing mission reports and transferring her equipment and responsibilities to other team members. The experience of preparing to leave a combat unit was emotionally complex. She had found her place within this military community and proven herself under the most challenging conditions possible. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson approached her on her last day at the base. Rodriguez, I want you to remember something when you're back in the States, dealing with all the attention you're going to receive. What's that, Gunny? Remember that the shot you made was just the beginning, not the culmination. You've proven you have exceptional abilities, but the measure of a true professional is consistency over time. Don't let anyone convince you that one successful mission, no matter how remarkable, defines your entire career. Elena appreciated the reminder. In the excitement and recognition surrounding her record-setting shot, it would be easy to lose sight of the fact that she was still early in her military career. There would be many more missions, many more opportunities to prove herself, and many more chances to make meaningful contributions to her unit's success. As the transport helicopter lifted off from Forward Operating Base Viper, Elena looked down at the compound, where she had transformed from an untested rookie into a proven combat sniper. The experience had changed her in ways she was still processing, but she was confident that it had prepared her for whatever challenges lay ahead. The so-called rookie was returning to the United States as a decorated veteran with a confirmed combat record that would be studied and admired for years to come. But, more importantly, she was returning with the knowledge that she could perform under the most demanding conditions her profession could present. Hashtag so-called rookie woman connects at nearly 5 kilometers. Document 5-6 months had passed since Elena's return to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, and her temporary assignment had evolved into something far more significant than anyone had initially anticipated. What began as a brief consultation on advanced shooting techniques had developed into a comprehensive research project that was revolutionizing sniper training methodologies. Elena stood in the instructor's observation tower, overlooking the advanced shooting range, watching a group of experienced snipers attempt to replicate the extreme range techniques she had developed. The morning Virginia air was crisp and clear, providing excellent visibility across the 1,000-meter range where the students were practicing. Master Chief Petty Officer David Harrison, the senior instructor at the school, joined her in the observation tower. Harrison was a legend in the special operations community, with over 20 years of experience training the military's most elite snipers. How are they progressing with the advanced wind calculation methods? Harrison asked, studying the students through his binoculars. Better than I expected, Elena replied, making notes on her evaluation sheet. The mathematical concepts are complex, but these are already experienced shooters. They understand the fundamental principles, so it's mostly a matter of expanding their existing knowledge. Harrison nodded. What about the psychological preparation techniques you've been developing? The mental conditioning for extreme-range shots. Elena had been surprised to discover that her approach to handling pressure and maintaining focus during difficult shots was significantly different from traditional sniper training methods. Her background in competitive shooting had given her unique insights into the mental aspects of precision marksmanship. That's proving more challenging, she admitted. Mental conditioning is harder to teach than mathematical calculations. It requires individual adaptation and extensive practice under realistic stress conditions. The advanced training program Elena had been developing was unlike anything previously offered at the sniper school. It focused on shots beyond 3,000 meters, distances that had previously been considered impractical for most operational scenarios. Her combat success had demonstrated that such shots were not only possible, but could be strategically valuable under the right circumstances. Rodriguez, I have some news that's going to interest you, Harrison said, his expression becoming more serious. The Commandant wants to meet with you this afternoon. There are some significant developments regarding your future assignments. Elena felt a familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with concern. Over the past 6 months, her military career had taken directions she never could have anticipated. Recognition for her exceptional shooting abilities had opened doors, but it had also created expectations and pressure she was still learning to navigate. The meeting with Commandant General Patricia Morrison took place in the historic headquarters building that had overseen Marine Corps operations for generations. Elena had never met an officer of such senior rank, and she was somewhat nervous as she was escorted to the Commandant's office. General Morrison was a compact, intense woman in her early 50s who had built her career on operational excellence and innovative thinking. She had been following Elena's progress since the mission in Afghanistan and had personally authorized the expanded training program at Quantico. Sergeant Rodriguez, the general began as Elena took a seat across from her desk. Your work over the past 6 months has been exceptional. The training methodologies you've developed are going to change how we prepare snipers for long-range precision shooting. Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored to contribute to the program. That contribution is going to expand significantly, General Morrison continued. We're establishing a new specialized training unit focused on extreme-range precision shooting. You're being offered the opportunity to lead that program as its senior instructor. Elena felt her heart rate increase. A leadership position of this magnitude was far beyond what she had imagined when she first reported to Quantico. It represented both an incredible opportunity and an enormous responsibility. Ma'am, what would this position entail? You would be responsible for developing curriculum, training instructors, and directly teaching the most advanced students, the general explained. You would also be involved in research and development of new techniques and equipment for long-range precision shooting. Elena considered the implications carefully. Such a position would allow her to have a significant impact on sniper training throughout the military. The techniques she developed would be used by special operations forces around the world. It was exactly the kind of meaningful contribution she had hoped to make during her military career. Ma'am, I'm honored by the offer. When would this assignment begin? Immediately, if you accept. We want to have the program operational within 6 months, and that requires someone with your expertise to design and implement it from the ground up. Elena accepted the position, understanding that it represented a fundamental change in her military career trajectory. She would be transitioning from being a combat sniper to being an educator and developer of future snipers. It was a responsibility she did not take lightly. The next several months were consumed with the intensive work of establishing the new training program. Elena found herself working with equipment manufacturers to develop improved rifles and optical systems for extreme-range shooting. She collaborated with meteorologists to better understand environmental factors that affected bullet trajectory at long distances. She worked with psychologists to develop mental conditioning techniques that would help snipers maintain focus under extreme pressure. The first class of students for the new program included some of the most experienced snipers from all branches of the military. Elena felt the weight of responsibility as she stood before these seasoned professionals, many of whom had significantly more combat experience than she did. Ladies and gentlemen, she began her opening lecture. What we're going to explore in this program pushes the boundaries of what most people consider possible in precision shooting. The techniques we'll learn here are designed for scenarios where conventional methods are insufficient. Elena had learned to handle the attention and recognition that came with her unique position, but she remained focused on the practical aspects of her job. Every technique she taught had to be grounded in real-world applicability. There is no room for theoretical knowledge that could not be applied under actual combat conditions. The training program Elena developed was comprehensive and demanding. Students learned advanced ballistics calculations that accounted for factors most snipers never considered. They practiced shooting under extreme environmental conditions that tested the limits of human and equipment capabilities. They underwent psychological conditioning that prepared them to maintain focus during the extended observation and calculation periods required for extreme-range shots. The success of the program exceeded everyone's expectations. Graduates were achieving consistent hits at ranges that had previously been considered impossible for all but the most exceptional shooters. More importantly, they were successfully applying these techniques in actual combat operations around the world. Elena received regular reports from former students who had used their training in operational situations. A Navy SEAL team had successfully eliminated a high-value target at 3,800 meters during operations in Syria. An Army Special Forces sniper had made a critical shot at 4,200 meters that had saved the lives of an entire patrol in Iraq. These successes validated the practical value of the advanced techniques Elena had developed. 2 years after accepting the instructor position, Elena was promoted to staff sergeant and given additional responsibilities for advanced marksmanship research. She worked closely with military research facilities to develop new ammunition designs optimized for extreme-range shooting. She consulted with rifle manufacturers on barrel and action improvements that could enhance accuracy at long distances. The work was intellectually challenging and professionally rewarding, but Elena sometimes found herself missing the direct action and clear objectives of combat operations. Teaching was important, but there was something uniquely satisfying about applying her skills directly in support of military missions. Her perspective on this changed when she received a letter from Corporal Sullivan, who had returned to Afghanistan for a second deployment. In the letter, Sullivan described a mission where techniques Elena had developed had enabled his team to eliminate a terrorist leader who had been responsible for multiple attacks against coalition forces. "The mathematical methods you taught us for win calculation made the difference," Sullivan wrote. "Without that training, we never could have made the shot that took out this target. Your work here at Quantico is saving lives downrange, and I wanted you to know that." Elena realized that her current position allowed her to have a much broader impact than she could have achieved as an individual combat sniper. Every student she trained would go on to use those skills in operational situations where they could protect coalition forces and eliminate threats to innocent civilians. The recognition Elena received for her contributions to military training continued to grow. She was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for her work in developing the Advanced Sniper Training Program. Military leadership schools requested her to speak about innovation and excellence under pressure. Defense contractors sought her input on new equipment designs. But Elena remained grounded in the fundamental principles that had guided her from the beginning of her military career. Technical competence, dedication to mission success, and service to her fellow soldiers were still the values that motivated her daily work. 5 years after her remarkable shot in Afghanistan, Elena found herself standing again in the observation tower Quantico, watching a new group of students attempt extreme-range shots. These students were using techniques she had developed, equipment she had helped design, and mental conditioning methods she had researched and refined. Master Chief Harrison joined her in the tower, as he had many times before. "Any regrets about the path your career has taken?" he asked, noting the thoughtful expression on Elena's face. Elena considered the question as she watched a student successfully engage a target at 3,500 meters using techniques that had not existed when she first arrived at Quantico. "No regrets," she said finally. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The so-called rookie who had once shocked experienced snipers with her exceptional shooting abilities had evolved into something far more significant. She had become an innovator, educator, and leader who was shaping the future of precision marksmanship for military forces around the world. Her record-setting shot in Afghanistan had been just the beginning of a career that was redefining what was possible in the field of military sniping. Elena Rodriguez had proven that exceptional individual performance, when channeled correctly, could create lasting improvements that benefited countless others who would follow in her footsteps. As the afternoon training session concluded and students began securing their equipment, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a doubtful reception at Forward Operating Base Viper to a leadership position at one of the military's most prestigious training institutions, her career had been shaped by a simple commitment to excellence and continuous improvement. The whispers about the so-called rookie had long since been replaced by recognition of a professional whose contributions would influence military training for generations to come. Elena Rodriguez had not just connected at nearly 5 kilometers. She had connected with a purpose that extended far beyond any single shot, no matter how remarkable.